When you think about love and marriage and those kind of things, I love to hear a child's perspective when it comes to love, when it comes to marriage. And so I too want to pull out some of these things that children have said about love. A group of professional people posed this question to a group of 4 to 8-year-olds: what does love mean? And the answers they got were broader and deeper than anyone could have imagined. Listen to this. Rebecca, aged 8, said, "When my grandmother got arthritis, she couldn't bend over and paint her toenails anymore. So my grandfather does it for her all the time, even when his hands got arthritis too. That's love." Another young man, Carl, age 5, says this: "Love is when a girl puts on perfume and a boy puts on shaving cologne and they go out and smell each other." Oh, Chrissy says this: "Love is when you go out to eat and give someone most of your French fries without making them give any of theirs." Love is when someone hurts you and you get so mad, but you don't yell at them because you know it would hurt their feelings. That's what Samantha, age 6, says. I love this one. Emily, age 8, said, "Love is when you kiss all the time. Then when you get tired of kissing, you still want to be together. And you talk more. My mommy and daddy are like that. They look gross when they kiss." Noel, age 7, says this: "Love is when you tell a guy you like his shirt, then he wears it every day." Oh, well, children have a way of putting words to thoughts like that. And if I were to ask you about love and marriage and its purposes, I think you would be able to give us the 3 purposes for marriage. Do you remember what Dennis just shared with us? It's the 3 M's. What are the 3 purposes of marriage? Number 1 is to, not to multiply. That's third. That's coming. What's the first one? To do what? Mirror God's image. We are to reflect who He is through our relationship. What is purpose number 2? To do what? To mutually complete one another. And it's there that we got the definition of what oneness is. And then thirdly is to do what? Multiply a godly legacy. Well, we are on page 54 as we talk about God's plan for oneness. Now, we realize that oneness is discovered as we receive our spouse as a gift from God. Now, as we build on this foundation and we begin to give some structure to it, we might ask the question, what's the secret to happiness in a marriage? And this question was actually posed to a couple. They lived in the Bahamas, and they were from the States, but they had moved to the Bahamas, and everybody had known about them and knew that they were known to have a very peaceful, happy marriage. And so the local newspaper came together, and they asked this couple, "What is your secret to your happiness in your marriage?" And so the man thought about it for a minute, and he said, "It all started on our honeymoon, actually." He said, "We were taking a trip to the Grand Canyon, and we were taking this incredible tour, and we were doing it by horseback." And he said, "My wife and I were on our horses, and as we're going through the canyon, my wife's horse stumbled and almost made her drop her purse. And my wife said to the horse, 'That's once.' And as we continued down the canyon, my wife's horse stumbled again, making her drop her water bottle. And she said, 'That's twice.' And sure enough, as we're going down some of those small places, my wife's horse stumbled again. She promptly got off of her horse, reached into her purse, pulled out a revolver, and shot the horse dead. And I looked at her and I said, 'Woman, are you crazy? What are you doing shooting that poor animal?' And my wife looked at me and she said, 'That's once.'" And he said, and we've lived happily ever after since. Is that God's plan? Is that his way of developing a great, whole, healthy marriage? Well, that worked for that couple, but that's not what we're going to talk about this morning. We're going to realize this, as the introduction says, the world's pattern for marriage has obviously failed. The 50-50 plan does not work. What is God's plan to accomplish his purposes in marriage? And we're going to talk about that. God's plan for oneness in marriage involves 3 responsibilities. I want you to repeat these 3 responsibilities after me. The first one is to leave, cleave, and become one flesh. Now, this is a fascinating, and it's very simple, but it's profound in its effect if we really grasp this. To leave, cleave, and become one flesh. Now let's look at number 1, leave. The first responsibility is to establish independence from your parents. Now this speaks of the priority of the relationship. This is incredible. We grow up, get married, and we are to leave. For this cause, a man shall leave his father and his mother. Now, letter A reminds us that leaving must be done in the context of honor to one's parents. This is not a leaving in the sense of, I can't wait to get out of the house. I just want to get away from my mother. I want to get away from my father. It's not in that context that we're talking about leaving. This is to be done in the sense of, I respect my parents. I honor them. I revere them. But even though we have those feelings of honor and respect, God has designed that a man and a woman leave their home. Now, what does this mean? What does it mean? We need to, letter B, beware of overdependence on parents. Now, when we think about leaving our parents, most of us would say, well, it means to leave physically. And that is a part of it. But you could be thousands of miles away from your parents and never really left that relationship. Let me give you an example. I was speaking with a couple who were in distress. And in fact, it was the wife who came to me and she says, we need to sit down and talk. And she says, I have a problem with my mother-in-law. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about it. And she had her husband there, and she was there as well. And I said, well, tell me when this all started. And she says, well, his mother has always been intrusive in our relationship. She would say things that she shouldn't say. And she said, I thought maybe it would change after we got married. And I said, well, tell me something that she does. She says, well, when she comes to visit, she'll walk into my kitchen and go, this isn't organized, right? This just isn't logical. And she says she will begin to change my kitchen around. Or she would look at our furniture and say, oh, that's just a horrible design, and she'd move our furniture around. And I said, well, when did this all start? She said, well, to be honest with you, I knew about it before we were married, and I knew that his mother was always involved in sticking her nose in her other children's business, so I told my fiance at the time, I said, do not tell your mother where we're going on our honeymoon. And he says, okay, well, I won't do that. She says, no, honey, I really want you to understand. I don't want anyone to know where we're going. I just don't want any intrusion. And sure enough, before their wedding, the mom came to her son and says, well, where are you guys going on your honeymoon? He says, well, Mom, I agreed with, and he gave his fiance's name. We agreed that we wouldn't tell anybody where we're going. And his mother began to cry. I carried you for 9 months. I have loved you. I have provided for you. What have I done? that you won't even share with me where you're going on your honeymoon. I'm not going to do anything. Don't you trust me? Don't you love me? Don't you remember all the meals I cooked? And she goes on, and finally he breaks down and says, okay, we're going to such and such a place. He gives her the name of the resort and everything. But he doesn't tell his future wife. So the day of the wedding has arrived, and they're so excited. And this lady is telling me this story. She's very animated. And she says, that was the day of my wedding, the happiest day of my life. And we're made it through our ceremony, and we're thinking about our honeymoon, and we're standing in the receiving line. And my mother-in-law comes up, and she hugs me, and she says, oh, I'm so excited for you guys. And I'll call him John. John told me where you guys were going on your honeymoon. And in fact, I was so excited that I booked a flight, and I'm going to be there, and I'm just a few doors down from where you guys are going to be. Now, I'm listening to this story going, this is unreal. And so I turned to the husband who's sitting there while his wife is telling the story. I said, what did you do? And he just kind of shook his head and shrugged his shoulders. He didn't do anything. And as a result, the mother-in-law has just been intrusive into their lives. And I looked at him, I said, you know what? You have never left home. You've never left home. And as a result, let me tell you this. This is so foundational. This is so key that I can't even talk about the other part of it if you've never left. If you don't leave, now we make a big deal out of leaving physically. I think that's the least of the worries. You need to leave emotionally. To be able to let go, to say, it's not as important what mama says or what daddy says. Honey, what do you say? You see, it's the ability to realize that the priority of all your life relationships, all your past relationships are secondary to the relationship of the husband and the wife. It's looking at your family of origins and saying, I love you guys, but now I must turn to my spouse. You see, it's a great test to see if you are committed to your family of origins or if you're committed to your new family. It's called loyalty. You know, when something great happens or something tragic happens, do you call your parents first? Or do you call your spouse? When you want to talk about your problems in your marriage, do you call your spouse or do you call your mother? You know, it's amazing to me how many men are still tied to their mother's apron strings. You know, my mother cooks better. My mother always did my laundry. My mother does this. You know, I always think of that. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Everybody Loves Raymond. Oh, I love Marie. She walks in and she just takes over the room. And Raymond is going to be strong and he's going to take Deborah's side. But once his mother walks through that door and she says, Raymond, he just melts. And you see what happens in a marriage. If you don't leave, you're not able to cleave. Now, I know some of you would say, you know, Ray, I left a long time ago. I've been away from my parents. In fact, my parents have passed off the scene. There's no way that I'm still connected with them. You'd be surprised. The baggage that you bring, you know, that invisible baggage that you bring into a marriage, that it takes us years to unpack, much of that baggage has to do with the fact that we don't want to let go of the past. We don't want to let go of what our parents said. Some of you act different after you've been on the phone with your parents. Some of you react totally different when your parents show up at your house. You know the feeling? You get all uptight. Oh boy, my father's coming. My mother's coming to visit. That's a red flag that something has not taken place, that you've truly not left. Their opinions, everything, you're so tied emotionally that you cannot really connect with your spouse. I know I'm taking a little bit more time with this, but this is important. It's not just being financially tied with them, which can happen. It's not just being physically close, but it's that emotional tie. It's that loyalty. And what God was telling Adam, now Adam didn't even have a physical father, did he? But it was so important that at that first wedding, God would say that a husband must leave father and mother and be joined with his wife. That's the first step in adding structure to this foundation that's already been built. That structure is to leave. Let's look at number 2. This is cleave. The second responsibility is to establish commitment to one another. Now, again, you're not going to commit to each other if you have not left these other relationships. Again, it's in the context of honor. It's in the context of respect. But then you turn from those relationships, they become secondary, and you say, I am committed to you. Again, for this cause, a man shall leave his father and his mother and shall cleave to his wife. This speaks of the permanence of marriage, the permanence of the relationship. We talked about the priority. Now this is the permanence of a relationship. Now, revisiting the garden illustrates this principle of cleaving to your spouse. Now, we live in a Post-it note society. Have you ever had a Post-it note? You just stick it here and you can take it off, and you can place it here and take it off. That's not the kind of cleaving that the Bible is talking about. It's the illustration of sticking like super glue. It's like welding two pieces of metal together so that the only way that you can get it apart is to destroy the entire unit. Cleaving is permanent in this way. Well, let's look at number 1. God created Adam, and so we're going back into the garden. God created Adam with an unmet need. Adam was alone. He was alone. And it says, the Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him. You know, I remember my single days very well. In fact, I was one of the kids who grew up always wanting to get married right out of high school. In fact, that was my goal. I was going to get married at 18. And so I was a fairly serious-minded young man and scared away all potential dates. And as a result, I didn't get married at 18 or 19 or 20. My life was over at 21. I was thinking, oh no, I'm never going to get married. It's useless. I'm 21. I'm over the hill. It's done. And then I wasn't married at 22, and 23, 24. And so I decided, I'm just going to be single the rest of my life. I was alone. And I began to feel that aloneness. And that's how Adam was. In fact, letter A, it says, up to this point in creation, God had said everything was what? Everything was good. Everything was good. But then letter B, it says Adam, and here's the amazing thing, had several advantages over modern man. Now, you have to think about this. Adam was in a perfect environment. There was no sin, no crime, no pain. He had no past, no dysfunctional family. He had none of that. Can you imagine the perfect world? He had communion with God. He could talk directly with him. It was clean air, no smog, no traffic, none of that. And yet God still said it wasn't good. Letter C, God chose to build a unique need into Adam that was not met by God's personal presence alone. Let me read that again. God chose to build a unique need into Adam that was not met by God's personal presence alone. I remember during my single years when I truly decided I'm just going to remain single, that I would do things by myself all the time. I'd go to fancy restaurants by myself. I'd dress up, buy myself a gift, and I would sit down at the restaurant and I'd open it up and go, "You shouldn't have." I mean, it was great. I'd go to movies by myself and I would go to amusement parks by myself. And I would always be that one where they'd say, "Do we have a rider by himself?" And I would raise my hand. You know, I met a lot of people that way. But I was alone, but I began to feel that need that God had created me for something other than that. You see, even though I had a relationship with God, there was some unmet need, and that originated with our father, Adam. Now, number two, how would God get Adam to realize that he needed someone? Well, God showed Adam his need. Number two, out of the ground, the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the sky and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called the living creature, that was its name. And the man gave names to all the cattle. Can you imagine? To all the birds of the sky and every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper suitable for him. Letter A, God gave Adam the assignment of naming all the animals. Before Adam knew he needed someone, before he got married, God gave him a what? A job. That's what I tell my daughters. He's got to have a job first. But God gave Adam a job to name. Now, we think of this in such a sterile way. You've got to realize he's naming thousands of creatures. This did not take place in one day. I mean, Adam is looking at these animals and naming them. I cannot imagine trying to name all the animals. Robin and I have had trouble naming 8 kids. In fact, all of our children's names begin with the letter R. All their middle names begin with the letter A. It's a sickness. I don't know what it is. And I remember that first child we had was Rachel. And we had always wanted a Rachel. And so we decided, yes, Rachel is her name. And then I always wanted a son named Ryan. And so we had our second born, and I was holding him, and I called him Ryan, and I loved on him until my mother walked into the delivery room, and she said, "Let me hold Ray Jr." And his name became Ray. I hadn't left yet, but anyway. So his name became Ray. And then we had our son Ross, and then finally I got my Ryan and Renee and Reagan and Raven. And pretty much Robin had a good influence over the kids' names. And finally on this our last baby, and you guys know the story, and I told you of the trouble that we had with her and all the blood transfusions and the doctor saying, "We can't assure you that she's going to live, but we're going to do everything that we can." I really wanted a special name for this baby. And I looked in all the name books, and we're just trying our best to have a special name. In fact, I was excited. Robin said, "Ray, you can name this baby. I've named most of the others. You can have this one." I said, "Oh, Rob, thank you, because I just feel like this should be a special name." So I looked through the name books and researched on the internet, and I came back. And this is before our baby was born. I said, "Robin, I've got the name." And she got really excited. I said, "I've picked a name so that we will never forget what God has done in this little child's life. Her name will be Remember. Is that funny? And so I said, her name's going to be Remember. And Robin got quiet. And I could just see my wife's face. She's trying her best, not to say anything. And she just kind of says, okay. And she walks away. And I'm excited. And I'm going to my kids and Remember. Her name's going to be Remember. And so I told a few people at church, we're going to name her Remember. And then my 15-year-old son came up to me one day and he says, Daddy, remember is a verb. And so he said that, and then when I went to church the next Sunday, our drummer came up to me and he says, hey, Ray, my wife and I mean, if you're going to name the child Remember, we just came up with all sorts of names that you could name her, and so how about Recreation? And so as that continued on, finally Robin came to me, and she said, Ray, I love you. And I know I said you could name this child. And she said, and I assure you, you can name this baby anything you want, but remember. And she says, I don't want to do that to her. And I said, but just can you see the beauty of it? She says, I don't want to do that to her. And so I was giving up on my dream of naming her Remember. And one night, I couldn't sleep, and I got up and I began to study just a little bit. And as I was studying, I kept thinking if there was some way I could name her something that had to do with God's healing. And I know there's the name for God in the Old Testament is Rapha, or Rapha, which means God heals. But I knew I couldn't name her Rapha. That would be like Remember, or call her Raphael or something, that wouldn't work either. And I kept saying, I want that name. And lo and behold, as I was studying in the book of Luke, there's the name Rhesa, Rhesa. It's a transliteration of the name Rapha. Well, I looked at that name, which means God has cured or God has healed. It could be pronounced Risa or Rhesa. I woke Robin up. I said, I've got her name. Her name is Risa. And Risa means God has healed. And that's her name. It stuck. Everybody liked it better than Remember. Yes. Now, I'm thinking if we had that much trouble naming a child, I cannot imagine Adam walking around, and God is giving him this task of all the birds, blue jay, cardinal, flamingo, ostrich, I don't know, just naming all of these animals, and he's going, bull, cow. The plumbing's a little different, but they are together. Buck, doe, ram, ewe, Adam, Adam. And you know what he began to realize as he named the animals? Letter B says this: Adam saw his own need as he named the animals. Letter C says, there was not found a helper suitable for Adam. You know, no matter how wonderful the gorilla looked, it did nothing for Adam. The gorilla did not correspond to him. So here's what happened. Number 3, God provided for Adam's need by creating Eve. Listen to this incredible love story. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh at that place. And the Lord God fashioned, he hand-built, he crafted this rib or this side into a woman, the rib which he had taken from the man, and brought her to the man. Now, you know, there's a story of a Sunday school teacher who was teaching how God created everything, and including human beings. And little Johnny was really especially intent when they told him how Eve was created out of one of Adam's ribs, out of his side. Now, later in the week, his mother reported noticing him lying as though he were ill. And she said to Johnny, "What is the matter?" And he responded, he says, "I have a pain in my side. I think I'm having a wife." Oh, I know some guys say yes. Anyway. You see, letter A tells us this, that God fashioned Eve to be suitable for Adam. Now, this is amazing. I want you to grasp this. Adam is in a perfect environment, perfect relationship with God. He's got a great job, great security, and he is naming these animals. But then God shows him his need, and then he fashions, he handcrafts, he handpicks this person for him. And then letter B, God presented Eve to Adam. Now, the important question was, would Adam receive Eve? Would he receive her? Letter B, Adam's perspective of God enabled him to receive Eve as God's perfect provision for him. Because Adam knew God, because he trusted God, he had to say, wow, this is another creature that God has provided just for me. And the man said, now listen to this song. I believe Adam sang this out. This was the first wedding song, I believe. He said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of men." He's telling all the animals and everything. Can you imagine? He's got all these animals he's named, and he wakes up after God had created this creature and brings her to him, and he's standing at that altar before God, and he just breaks out into song. She's unlike anything I've seen. She is taken out of me. She shall be called woman. Now, in this passage, God illustrates the cornerstone principle for marriage. You've got to get this. This is key, foundational to the whole talk. You get this, and you've got the whole thing. We must choose to receive our spouse as God's perfect provision for us. It didn't say you must feel like it, but you must choose to receive your spouse as God's perfect provision for us. I never will forget that when I realized Robin was the one for me, and that I could not live without her. Before I asked her to marry me, I went to my mother, and I was raised in a single-parent home, so I went to my mother. I said, "Mom, what do you think about Robin?" She looked at me and she says, "I want you to know, as a mom, who you marry is so important." And she said, "If I could handpick someone for you, it would have been her." I was like, all right. You see, that in a sense, when God gave you your spouse, he handpicked them. You go, well, not really, I picked them. Well, no, he did it. He sealed it. He chose that person for you. And you must receive them as God's perfect provision. Why? Look at letter A. Or how can we do this? We must focus on God's character. Now, this is important. Focus on God's character and his goodness in providing our spouse. Focus on God's character. He's in charge. Nothing gets by him. He wasn't surprised. He didn't say, oh my goodness, he went out and got that girl. I didn't see her coming. And God is not out to punish you. That's not a part of God's character. And so we've got to trust him and his goodness. Letter B, receiving our spouse is not based on our spouse's performance. I like that because, you see, Adam didn't know anything about Eve, did he? He didn't know if she could cook. There was nothing to cook. He didn't know if she could sew. There were no clothes to wear. He didn't have a mother to compare her to. There was no past experience. And see, receiving your spouse is not based upon their performance. Number 2, Adam enthusiastically received Eve. Why? Because he knew and trusted God, not because of Eve's performance. Now, what keeps us from receiving our mates? I want to get into the meat of this. There are hindrances. There are several things that really keep us from receiving our mate. Let's look at them. Here are hindrances to reception. 3 barriers make it difficult to receive our spouse as a gift from God. Letter A, our natural differences. Our natural differences. Because we are different, we will find ourselves warring or not wanting to accept each other. We spend so much energy in our marriages trying to change the other person. Well, what are some of those differences? Well, we have gender differences. I mean, we are different from every fiber of our being. There's a study that's been done, and I'm going to read some of these to you, that it says men and women differ in every cell of their bodies. This difference is in the chromosome combination, is the basic cause of development into maleness and femaleness. We spend a lot of time in our country trying to say that men and women are the same. In the 70s and 80s, it was very popular to think that. But all of a sudden, in the 2000s here, we realized something. They've spent thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to realize this. Men and women are different. Wow, what a revelation. This study also found that the sexes differ in their basal metabolism, that of a woman being normally lower than that of a man. It says that a woman's heart beats more rapidly, 80 beats versus 72 beats for men. It also talks about how in infant males, there's a greater mortality rate. It says that females mature faster than males. I'm surprised some ladies didn't say amen. Okay, it also says that females are chemically and biologically adapted to bearing and rearing children. And males are more chemically and biologically adapted to hunting and providing. Now, when it comes to mentally and psychologically, men and women are different. It talks about that verbal and spatial abilities in boys tend to be packaged, listen to this, packaged into different hemispheres of the brain. The right hemisphere for nonverbal tasks, and then the left for verbal tasks. But in girls, nonverbal and verbal skills are likely to be found on both sides of the brain. Now, this is amazing. Women have a tendency to use both sides of their brains at the same time. Men are more compartmentalized. We're brain damaged. We use one side or the other. Not really. In this study, it talks about how girls speak sooner and they have larger vocabularies. And this is true. I have 5 daughters and 3 sons, and I've seen the difference. My daughters have conversations. They talk. My boys make noises. And they do that even now. At 15, 14, and 13, they grunt, they groan, they make shooting noises and other profane noises. They're different in that way. It talks about how boys show early visual superiority and how boys have better total body coordination, but poorer at detailed hand activities such as stringing beads. It says that women have greater individual mood fluctuation. 1 in 4 women, yes. I'm sure that's a revelation to you. But anyway, 1 in 4 women is seriously affected in premenstruation. Also, at this time, women are inclined toward more illness, more tension, and show more inclination to crime. Wow. This study also noted that there are more males on both ends of the intellectual spectrum, more retardeds as well as more geniuses. Wow. I mean, men and women are different. I think about how we relate socially. Men and women are different. The way we go to the bathroom and things is different. I don't mean just physically, but when you think about it, and this has happened to me recently. Robin will say, hey, Ray, I need to go to the bathroom. And let's say we're with a group of people. She'll say, I need to go to the restroom. And then she'll just kind of look around the table and say, hey, any of you ladies need to go to the bathroom? And you know what? All the ladies grab their purses and they go to the bathroom. And it's just an amazing thing, and they go off and they talk. I don't know what takes place, but it's a lot of activity and things going on. And now, wouldn't it be amazing if I were at a restaurant or maybe a concert or something, and I stood up and said, hey, I need to go to the bathroom. Any of you guys want to go to the bathroom with me? It ain't happening. And then, you know, I have to admit, I've peeked into a ladies' restroom or two just to see what's there. Because when my wife goes, she stays. And what I've discovered, there's couches, coffee pots. I mean, there's all... Because Robin will come out of the bathroom and she'll say, oh, I met this lady. And she's going through a divorce and this is happening and she's got a teenage son. And I'm like, where did you talk? She said, oh, between the stalls. I mean, when we as men go to the bathroom, we stare straight ahead. And if you know the guy next to you, you ignore him. And then when you leave, you talk. You know, how about those bears? I don't know. But there's differences in that way. Differences in perspective, not just our gender, but differences in our perspective, the way we view life. The way we see things, we view them differently when it comes to how we interact with our children. I'm more, this is the boundaries, this is what it says, and this is what we're going to do. Robin has a tendency to show more grace and more compassion, different perspectives. There's differences in temperaments. You might be introverted. You like to ponder. You like to keep quiet. To keep things to yourself, and your spouse is extroverted, they're outgoing. You might have different backgrounds. I came from a single-parent home. Robin's parents are still married 56 years, something like that. 57? Wow, 57 years. Yes, that's amazing. And so we've got different backgrounds and different experiences. And then how about different preferences, it says under here? I mean, Robin likes things loud. I mean, she's outgoing. She wants the music going out loud. And she's got the TV on. The music's going. The kids are loud and jumping around. And I'm just the opposite. I come home and I turn everything down. Yeah. I make the kids sit on the couch. And we just get calm, turn the lights down. We're different in that way. When it comes to how we arrive places, I like to be places early. I mean, you know, if you're going to be on time, you have to be early. Now, Robin's different. Her view is if the event's still going on when we got there, we made it. We got there. We've accomplished it. You see, we're different when it comes to spending money as well. I mean, we found ourselves somewhere in the middle, but we still have different preferences and tendency. If I like something, my question is it quality? And Robin's more pragmatic. How much does it cost? And so we differ in that way. She's a Walmart queen. I hate that. Well, I won't say. Anyway, it's not a place that I go to very often. You know, I love structure, and Robin loves freedom. I love to, Robin loves spontaneity. She just wants to do things without planning them. Let's just be spontaneous. And I agree with her. Let's be spontaneous. Just schedule it in, and we can do that. You know, those things can be barriers because we're so different. But you see, number 1 tells us this, that differences are not hindrances to achieving God's purposes in our marriage or in your marriage. You see, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. So these differences are not hindrances, but number 2, these differences are God's tools to teach us to trust him and his goodness. I mean, it's amazing how I've learned from my wife. How I've learned to be in tune to what people are feeling, what they are thinking, to come outside myself and engage in the lives of people. And Robin's learned as well that everything doesn't have to be a party. It's okay to just invite 1 or 2 people over and not 50. It's okay to have an intimate time. It's okay for things to be quiet. And so we've learned it's a tool that has helped develop each of us. As this says, iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Now, not only our natural differences can be a barrier, but letter B, our natural weaknesses. Our natural weaknesses. We are born with innate weaknesses. Things that may be positive on one hand, but on the other, the flip side is they are a weakness. Now, number 1 tells us weaknesses are not justification for rejecting your spouse. They're not a justification for rejecting our spouse. Number 2, weaknesses have divine purposes in our lives. Now, I believe that this is where the gap theory, as we've talked about, filling in the gap, I think this is where this takes place. That God uses these things in our lives and have our spouse to help offset us or balance those. For instance, weaknesses of being impatient. And then you have a spouse who has a tendency to be patient. Maybe the weakness of being indecisive. And then you have a spouse who's decisive. Or maybe you're overly talkative, and your spouse has a tendency to be the listener. Maybe you're disorganized and everything is just piled everywhere, and more than likely you married someone who's a neat freak, and they like everything put away. And then you've got the person with a critical spirit. But you know what? Maybe the flip side is someone who's very analytical. And then you've got someone who's demanding. And maybe you marry someone who's very grace-filled, and we fill in the gaps. So our natural weaknesses have a tendency to be barricades as well. Letter C, our natural self-centeredness. Our natural self-centeredness. The bottom line is this: I want my needs met. I want my needs met. I want life to go my way. Wouldn't life be wonderful if everybody just did what we wanted? It would. It would just run so smoothly. But number 1, we must admit that we are selfish. We've got to admit that we are selfish. And number 2, receiving our spouse is demonstrated by placing our spouse's needs ahead of our own. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, let each of you regard one another as more important than himself. You see, that's where the 50-50 plan has to be discarded. When you begin to realize, I'm going to put my wife's needs ahead of my own. I'm going to put my husband's needs ahead of my own. Letter D tells us to reject your spouse in any way is to, 1, reject God and his provision for your life. You're saying, God, you gave me the wrong person, and therefore I reject you because you're the one who gave him or her to me. Number 2, to reject your spouse is to reflect negatively on the character of God. Can God make a mistake? Now, I know we know the right answer, but we don't always feel the right answer. No, He is in charge. He is in control. It's not spinning out of control. We feel that way, but we need to trust the character of God. Number 3, to reject your spouse is to demonstrate unbelief and disobedience toward God. And to reject your spouse is to fail to fulfill God's plan and purposes for marriage. You see, God uses our natural differences, our weaknesses, and selfishness to build oneness. Listen carefully. Marriage takes work. Marriage takes time. Robin and I have been married for almost 18 years, and you want me to be honest with you? I feel like I'm just now starting to get it. I'm going, wow, oh, okay. I think I'm starting to get this thing. So when couples have been married 2 years and 3 years and 7 years and say, well, we just can't make it work, I'm going, you haven't started yet. You're still unpacking your junk. You haven't gotten to the place of relating to each other. You see, letter F tells us that as an act of your will, you must receive, not just accept your spouse as God's gift made personally for you to meet your specific aloneness needs. You must receive them, not just accept them. Our kids have been begging for a dog for quite some time. And my wife is not a dog lover. But the kids were like, Daddy, can we just get a small dog, something that we can have? We'll take care of it. I promise you that. And I love dogs too, and I was kind of breaking down. I was like, Rob, we really need to get them a dog. I said, I'll research it. I'll make sure it's a dog that doesn't shed, a dog that doesn't cause allergies, and it's a small dog. So we found out that a Bichon was a type of dog that is like that. So I said, Rob, I found the perfect dog. Let's just surprise the kids on Christmas. This was 2 years ago. And so we got this nice little white fluffy Bichon. On Christmas Eve, I had it hidden behind my back, and I said, guys, we've got something to surprise you with. And when I took that dog from behind my back, the house just erupted. Everybody's jumping, even my teenagers, jumping up and down. They're clapping. They're like, oh, this is the greatest Christmas we ever had. This is the best gift. If we don't get any more gifts, this is the best gift. And I want to go, Robin, take the gifts back. You know, this is wonderful. They were so excited. And then when I looked over, I saw one of my girls, Renee, she was crying. I said, Nene, what's wrong? And she was standing there, and as her tears were coming down, and I said, what's wrong? And she said, dreams really do come true. And she's sitting there with tears in her eyes, and I said, Renee, do you want to hold the puppy? And she said, yes. And she said, can I name her Rose? And so that was her name. And I handed Renee the puppy. And I tell you, she received and held and loved on that puppy. Now that's receiving. Now the other day, I got a ticket. I was driving a little fast. And when the police officer handed me the ticket, I accepted it. But I did not receive it. And some of you receive your spouses like I accepted that speeding ticket. Well, if I have to, I'll take it. There's nothing I can do. He's my husband. She's my wife. But we're talking about receiving just like Renee received that puppy. Well, let's move on to our last step here. Number 4, we are to leave, cleave, and become one flesh. The third responsibility is to establish intimacy with one another. Now, we talked about the priority of the relationship, that's to leave. We talked about the permanence of the relationship, that's to cleave. Now, this is the power of the relationship. This is incredible, to become one. This is the power of the relationship. For this cause, a man shall leave his father and his mother and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. You see, letter A, physical intimacy is the expression of complete oneness, body and soul in marriage. Sex is powerful. It's powerful. It's soulish. It represents, this physical act represents the spiritual thing that's happening, and that's the becoming one. And we'll talk about that this afternoon. Letter B, the result of leaving, cleaving, and becoming one flesh is transparency with one another, or oneness, or another way to say it, they were naked and not ashamed. Transparent. Letter C, one flesh intimacy is built on a foundation of sacrificial love for each other. You know, marriage, again, is not for the faint at heart. Marriage takes some toughness, self-denial, and sacrifice. Let me ask you a question. Will you choose to look to God as the giver of good gifts and receive your spouse as his perfect gift for you? You may not have ever realized it, but that person that you're sitting next to, your husband or your wife, is God's perfect provision for you. What you committed to on earth, God sealed in heaven. You see, our perspective of God enables us to receive our mate as his gift. Is God big enough to make the best of our worst situations? Is he? He is. Number 2, will you trust God as Adam did? It's a very important question. Remember this, the basis for one's reception of his spouse is faith in God's integrity. It is impossible to trust the character and integrity of someone you do not know. You see, relying on God's power is the key to fulfilling God's purposes and plan for marriage. I would have to say the greatest lesson that I've learned at a Family Life Weekend to Remember conference is this. By far, the things that stick out the most to me when Robin and I first started attending our conferences, the first one was this: my mate is not my enemy. Because there were times I thought, she's got to be. No doubt. But I would say, really, the number one thing that struck me the most was this: my wife is God's perfect provision for me. Not for you, but for me. And so we have a choice. Will you receive your husband? Will you receive your wife as that perfect gift that God has given to you?
That was Family Life Weekend to Remember conference speaker Ray McKelvey speaking on God's plan for oneness. On the next CD, we'll hear from Charlie Boyd on preparation for marriage.